You're listening to Genuine Chit-Chat. This show is for real.
Hello there guys, and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week I'm joined by Ben of the YouTube channel Star Wars Timeline. So guys, this is another two-parter. So part one is out obviously now, that's what you're listening to, and then part two will be out in a week's time. But if you can't wait for that, then go over to patreon.com/genuinechitchat, and for as little as £1 a month, you get access to the Patreon exclusive feed, which has this full Genuine Chit-Chat episode in there, as well as hours and hours and hours of additional content that you can only get on Patreon. So make sure you check that out, a link is in the description. But getting into the detail of this conversation, I obviously spoke with Ben of Star Wars Timeline, and we spoke about a wide variety of things. In part one, we didn't actually talk about Star Wars, barely at all, so don't worry if you're not the biggest fan of Star Wars. We speak about Ben moving from his home country of Russia over to New York, obviously the United States, and we talk about some of the cultural differences and similarities, as well as Ben's education in animation. We speak about animation a little bit, as well as mythology, and Joseph Campbell is mentioned, and then towards the end of this conversation, we then talk about Dune a little bit. In this one, it's completely spoiler free. We just give a small amount of our thoughts on it, and then it cuts before we get into the more in-depth discussion, which will be in part two. Now, I will just quickly add here that at the start you hear Ben's voice. The connection is a little bit off for the first minute or so of the conversation. It's very, very minor. You can't really notice the difference that much, but just for any of you audiophiles out there, if you do notice it, don't worry, after a minute or so it goes completely normal and the issue does not reoccur, so no worries at all there. But make sure you check out Ben's YouTube channel as well as his social media. Links are in the description. Make sure you check out my 4 appearances on Star Wars Timeline, and just enjoy the conversation. It is a lot of fun, but I'm going to be back at the end to give a little bit more information of what's to come and things, and as we end the year of 2021. But hope you guys enjoy this. So I present to you Ben of Star Wars Timeline. Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people, and I'm your host, Mike Burton. And here we are. So I am joined today with my good friend Ben, and this is probably the first time that I've had a guest on the show that I've been on their show so many more times than they've been on mine. Normally people come on my show like once or twice and then I'll go on their show and things, but I've been on your show 4 times already. I mean, 3 of them were like weeks after each other and things. So why don't you tell everyone how it is that we kind of got to know each other, because what it is, the kind of content you create.
Mm-hmm. First of all, Mike, thank you very much for having me. I feel honored and I feel completely relaxed. Now I don't have to put in any work. I just have to answer questions. That's got to be exciting, right? My name is Ben, and I started the Star Wars Timeline channel because I came across people on social media asking questions. Hey, where to start in the books? Where to start reading? So I'm like, okay, let me start answering that. Put all my creative juices into this channel. I started Facebook group, Star Wars Timeline, thinking I will just drop my videos there. Nobody will come to watch them. And they're kind of like a community snowballed out of there. And very lately, I questioned myself, should I jump on Twitter or not? I know what kind of, stigma it has, and Star Wars, _ channel, threw it in there, Star Wars Timeline, just throw all my content in there. And I started receiving this response. I'm like, okay. And then I don't actually exactly remember how you and I started conversing. I think it was one of the Facebook groups it could have been.
I think
right?
I
saw a comment or two, and I always enjoy sharing thoughts and opinions with people, especially those who disagree with me. Like, hey, why do you think this way? Why do you think that way? And our shared love and passion for Star Wars, that's what it started,
Yeah, I think it was the Facebook groups and things, but yeah, your channel Star Wars Timeline, I love it because you've got the shorter episode or the shorter videos and things that you just do sort of like mini deep dives on species or planets or characters and things, which I do thoroughly enjoy. And then you've also got the longer form ones, which you've been doing more recently with speaking with other individuals and whatnot. But if we roll it all the way back to sort of your early life, you were not born in the United States, which is where you're currently residing. So would you like to tell us sort of where you originally were from and why you decided to move to America, in essence?
Yeah, so I kind of traveled, right? I was born on the last wave of Soviet Union, right? 1981, I was born in a republic called Moldova, which is now an independent, free government, but it was like part of Soviet Union, and people speak kind of like Russian and Roman in there. From there, I was like 4 or 5. I moved to Caucasus, south of Russia, between the Black and Caspian Sea. Spent most of my teenage years. And then when I was 14, we moved to New York. And basically, that's what I've stayed most of my life. If somebody told me at 14 that I would come abroad and live in a different country and speak in a different language, I would have laughed. I'm like, come on, man. What are you saying? The first thing I remember coming to New York, the biggest like sort of phobia and question was, will I ever be able to speak like consistent English, like string sentences together and formulate thoughts? It was the biggest scare. Even though like we studied English, the Queen's British or what you call the proper English in Russia, you come here, nobody studied it. Nobody's like, oh, we're not going to use it, you know? So you come here, you have to start from the beginning, the past, present, future times, the verb to be and all that stuff. Like it was pretty nightmarish. But yeah, we moved because the climate was quite uneasy in Russia in that time. Post, the fall, collapse of Soviet Union, 1991, it was like complete chaos, people privatizing sectors and people taking the wealth of Russia and just like putting it to offshore accounts, just robbing, the country blind. And the south of Russia was like, there was a lot of crime, and my family had a business, and my grandfather just said, you know what, I can't. I don't want my grandchildren experiencing all of this mess. Let's move. Actually, my great-uncle, who was a Soviet-era popular actor who moved to the United States to New York decades earlier, he actually got to star in one of the films with Robin Williams, Moscow on Hudson. He plays Robin Williams' crazy old man. And he was inviting us over. Many, many years, he said, like, he was my grandfather's brother, actually. He was saying, come over, come to New York. It's such a vibrant city. You will love it here. There's, there's culture. There's Russians here. Come over. So that was sort of the decision. My family was kind of like weighing our options. And then we one day picked our bags and left.
Wow. Yeah. That's really cool. And you say that, obviously with learning English and things, that was tasking. Did you, how many languages do you speak? How many languages do you speak, basically?
Russian, English, and I speak a tiny bit of Farsi. Farsi is a Mediterranean language, which a lot of cultures speak, primarily Iranians. This is where my roots are. So I'm, so to speak, a Caucasian Jew or Sephardic Jew, or you could say Iranian Jew. That's my roots, dating back 3,000 years ago. My parents speak it fluently. We don't have a writing system because the language is actually very, very old. It's older than modern Iranian language, I'm sorry. And so we only have verbal traditions and verbal language. So my parents are fluent in that. I'm like, okay, I can understand a little bit over here and over there, but generally it's just Russian and English.
And coming over, I'm not over there. I'm not based in the US, but going over there at that age to learn English. I mean, your English is, fluent at the moment. Well, so was that, you mentioned it was kind of difficult. Was it difficult for you to acclimatize? Because 14 is quite late. Like if you were like 6 years old or something and you came over, by the time you were 14, it wouldn't have been a second thought. So how was that sort of the early years of you growing up in the US, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, sure. The contrast is actually, I have a younger brother, Joe, right? He has his own YouTube channel, like heavy metal and all that stuff. So we're 6 years apart. He was 8, I was 14. And frankly, the contrast between the two wasn't that different. Because when you're 14, you pick up information a lot quicker than, let's say, when you were like 20 or 30, right? So it was still, first half a year for myself and for him, it was like you are in this cultural bubble that you're in. You don't speak the language. You don't understand the culture. We couldn't imagine what New York would be like, because obviously, all the kids in the world at that time grew with Hollywood cinema, right? From Breakfast Club to Indiana Jones to Back to the Future. We saw a romanticized, this magical version of the United States through cinema. And that's all the access we had. Unless, of course, there was like a documentary on TV, but even that was just a small glimpse. When you come here, it's not just language barrier, it's culture shock. And I remember for a very long time, I used to sit, I went to this huge school called John F. Kennedy High School in the Bronx. It's primarily, the kids were demographically Hispanic kids, Latino kids, Black kids, and only 6 students of like 6,000 student school. And you would sit silently in the classroom and just not say a word because there was just like that kind of barrier. I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't want to sound stupid and inaccurate. I remember one day some Spanish kid turned over and he looked at me over the shoulders like this big guy. He said, "Hey, Ben, are you okay?" is someone bothering me? Like, you're so quiet all the time. What is your problem? Sorry, guys. This is New York saying hello. Michael and I, we constantly hear this during my podcast, my recordings. It's sort of kind of like a familiarity, but sorry, we now introduced the sound to your podcast as well.
The tradition continues.
Right, tradition continues. And this boy, you know, he asked me, like, hey, Ben, what is the problem? You okay? And I told him, English is my problem. It was so scared to speak up. He's like, don't worry, man, you'll get this. So, you know, and after slowly, obviously half a year later, when you jump from the ESL classes into proper English and you start learning math and you start learning history, it snowballs, it picks up. I used a lot of diversions outside of school to pick up on English. Like, I would translate my favorite heavy metal lyrics, which I grew up with in Russia, like Metallica. Like, yeah, you know, you love the music, but you don't know the lyrics. I'm like, okay, now I live in this country. It's a perfect opportunity to learn. And comic books was also my huge window into understanding language because they're bubbles. That's all you have to pick up. It's not intimidating at all. You sit side by side with a dictionary, right? This is before Google Translate. Before online dictionaries, you would just sit with a physical translator in your comic book and you're like, okay, let's figure this thing out.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, that's a good amount of dedication for your sort of, the roots of being, you know, a nerd in all the best ways. You know, I obviously am. Yeah. I mean, in the background, there's even a Lego Millennium Falcon. So, you know, that's how we got connected. But with, so we move on a small amount because there's a few bits of information that I know about you that our listeners definitely won't know. But even people who listen to your channel, I'm not sure if you've told them about it on your channel. But you're sort of, actually, I think you might have done a podcast or two about your past of being an animator, in essence. And I want to ask sort of being in that field, how you got into that, and did that come from your love of sort of anime and that sort of thing, or was it kind of the reverse?
First of all, I would like to make a small confession. I think I've made it in one of my podcasts. I'm now publicly announcing it here. I kind of cheat. I say that I'm an animator because I have a degree in animation, right?
I mean, I studied
4 years. I have a degree. I insist. I have a degree in animation. I never pursued it as a career because by my final year graduating from School of Visual Arts here in New York, I realized there has to be a balance between workload and you enjoying it. If workload outweighs your love or passion for something and your heart is not in it, you can't call yourself that. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So when I studied, and I'll tell you, I'll speak up to how I got into animation, but my final year, I took courses like the art history, and I took classes in mythology, and I took classes in 3D Mayan modeling. And being such a huge video gamer, I knew that I kind of picked the wrong direction. I should have been a 3D modeler or a 3D animator. That would have been my thing. I would totally dedicate myself to that, but alas, it was too late. But how I got into it is, once again, I told you that most of the kids grew up with Hollywood cinema and obviously Disney. And in Russia, you know, mid-'80s, early '90s was already a lot more lax. And the government allowed influx of Western cinema. They was like, okay, let the kids watch it. Even though it wasn't entirely legal, you would have some films which came out in theaters and you would see the posters and go see them. But primarily we got everything through pirated VHS tapes. That's how I saw Star Wars. That's how I saw Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, Terminator, RoboCop, all these movies, right? And gathering my thoughts. Your question was?
It was about why you pursued the career of animation.
Right, because I pursued
degree.
Right, we were on Disney, sorry. Yeah. And obviously a huge part of the childhood was Disney. Partially it was their animated series that were on television, like, you know, DuckTales and, you know, Chip and Dale and all of that stuff. But also the animated films, Pocahontas, you know, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, you know, Aladdin. When I saw that, I'm like, and I used to draw them in my little sketchbook. I always dreamed that I would work for Disney one day. That would be this great. And we also had a very immense tradition and library of Russian animation, which is known throughout the world as some of the most amazing animation ever produced. And I said, I want to work for Disney someday. So we came here, and the way that I got specifically in that school and got a degree in animation, somebody at my public college, the Lehman College that I went to, my art teacher said, well, Ben, there is this School of Visual Arts. If you like animation, you should go there. And I went there. I had an interview, and the lady, not maliciously so, but she sort of laughed at me. She saw my little scribble. She said, Ben, you realize this is one of the best schools on the eastern coast of the U.S., like art schools. Only special gifted kids get here. Like what you brought here, it's just scribbles. You don't even have a portfolio. I got up. I was so fumed. I went to the interview by myself. I was 18 years old. My parents were not present. You know, you're like, feel a little bit vulnerable and insecure. And I stood up. I got so fumed. I looked at her. I said, lady, expect me in the school next year. So I left. I picked up my scribbles, and the same professor who suggested the school to me, she helped me build my portfolio, for which I'm forever grateful. So I came back next year, all my portfolio done, and I went to the school based on the principle that I will do the impossible. You told me no, but I will get in the school and I will study animation.
Amazing.
So that was impulse. The encouragement, the inspiration, aside from Disney and Russian film, was also anime, which we had very little access to in a small town that I grew up in. But the two biggest things were Guyver, and it was one early Miyazaki film, which I forget what it was. It was an earlier Miyazaki film. It's fully animated, and we did understand that it was Japanese. It was specifically a type of animation, but I didn't realize it was this anime genre. You know, I just knew it was a Japanese cartoon.
Mm. And out of interest, what kind of since then, what other anime do you like? Because I know you like a few.
So once I came here, I started working in a comic book shop right across my street called Bulletproof Comics for many years. And the way that I got into working there was this Korean gentleman who owned it, Steven Chow, who had a bunch of comic books and video games that he sold there. And I came through one time and he had a collection of anime. And DVD was coming in hot in the United States because PlayStation 2 was the cheapest DVD player that you could play. So it's kind of like a gaming culture clashing with anime culture together in one, because all the video game kids in New York, at least the kids that I talked to who played PlayStation 2 video games, they wanted to jump on this new, beautiful, crispy, high definition way of looking at anime, right? Mm-hmm. And I started talking to this owner, and he was like, Ben, you have to see the original Vampire Hunter D. Boom.
Oh, I love that. I've got that on DVD.
Right? You have to see Akira. Boom. You have to see the original Ghost in the Shell. Boom. Mm-hmm. It's like he started barraging me with all this stuff. Escaflowne, Outlaw Star, Cowboy Bebop. You know, it's like, of course, Naruto was already making its headway into the States. It was only available on VHS. Naruto. You know, so many animes of that late 80s, early 90s, and mid 90s is where it thrived. And then by 2000s, I kind of like got out of it because it got populated by this, you know, lolicon, waifu, kind of like big-breasted women kind of thing. I was like, it's not for me. Berserk obviously was a huge one.
Yeah, because I've seen a fair amount of anime, but not like a huge amount. Maybe more than the average person, but definitely not as much as some of my friends and things. You know, I used to watch Dragon Ball a lot, so I've seen all of Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Kai, lots of the films, and then I've seen bits of Super. And then I saw like a lot of Pokemon, Digimon, Vampire Hunter D, Fist of the North Star, and that sort of thing. And then I've seen like some Studio Ghibli sort of films, Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, a couple of those.
Those are the heavy ones, the big ones.
Yeah. And there's a few other, you know, I've seen Ghost in the Shell. I've got Akira on Blu-ray. I haven't watched it yet though. It was a gift from a friend of mine this year, so I do need to get in on that as well. But yeah, I mean, animation is so diverse, and I whenever people say, I just don't like cartoons, I'm just like, but I know there are probably people who listen to this podcast who may have that opinion, and that's fine. But I'm always just a bit like, but that's such a broad brush of like the variation you can have from something like, you know, SpongeBob to South Park to Rick and Morty to then, you know, Star Wars, Clone Wars, which is animated. It's just, you know, 3D models as opposed to 2D animated and things. And it's just like those kind of, the variety there in itself is completely different. So out of interest with those, do you have like a favorite type of animation style? Is it the Russian sort of ones that you saw in your youth, or is there another one that's quite a contender?
No, you know, because I was equally exposed to everything, I don't play favorites. I never have. Whether it's American animation or you look at something like Soviet era 60s and 70s animation, a lot of Russian filmmakers did adaptations of world classics, whether it's like Hans Christian Andersen, or they collaborate a lot with Japanese filmmakers. Akira Kurosawa came over and he directed Russian films as well. So as far as animation is concerned, when you're, you know, picture a box of candy, It's all candy. It doesn't matter. Like you pick a chocolate and then you get, this one and that one. It doesn't matter. And, between anime or whether it's a claymation or whether it's something experimental and intended for adults. Like, for example, there's one famous Russian animated film, which is done entirely with a box of matches.
What?
That's all it is. It's a commentary on war. And it's animated. He takes each individual match piece and he parades them as soldiers and he tells a story with them. He brings character to a piece of matches. It's a very highly experimental film. But when you watch something like that and you move to something like claymation, where each claymation piece is actually woven out of fabric, right? And then you move to something that's made out of clay or wire. Like you can't go back from that. I guess that's one thing that, generally when you talk to younger people, especially like the millennial generation, they hear Soviet Union or communism or Soviet regime. They think that they were with these narrow-minded, tunnel vision kind of kids. We had a very, very broad education in terms of school and in terms of cultural influences from around the world. And art and animation was a huge part of it. We saw a lot of Western animation. Who didn't grow up with Tom and Jerry? That's culture. Those animated films won Oscars, right? The one where Miles goes to New York, I think. Remember the one with the Jerry? It's an episode featuring only him, and he goes to the big city, and you experience New York through him. That's culture. That's art. And when you experience all of it, like I never distinguished. I never knew the difference. It was all a world of animation to me.
Yeah, it's a very good way of putting it. Like I feel similarly with animation. Like, for example, Spirited Away has some of my favorite hand-drawn animation, if not my favorite ever. But then I love some of the over-top elements that come with like Dragon Ball Z and things, where they're like, powering up and things, and everything around them's cracking, and you've got all these sort of layers of it and things. And then you get sort of, stop motion things. Like one of my favorite films is Isle of Dogs, and another one is Coraline, and both of those are stop motion by different directors. But like those top contenders for me of maybe that genre don't compare to each other. It's kind of like, what's your favorite? Do you like your favorite comedy film more than your favorite sci-fi film? And it's like, well, they're two quite different mediums. They're quite different feels to them. And with animation, there's just such a wide scope and variety. And as you say, it's so connected with the culture, is that most nations across the world have their own sort of variant. I mean, even, obviously Americans have got their standard sort of cartoon, but even they've got elements which are more similar to anime, such as like Avatar.
Yeah. But even, within one culture, you have experimental artists who do different things. And as far as aesthetic goes, the only thing when I became older and more critical, obviously, and, when you have that film education and animation, and you're taught by top professors in the country, you kind of like start shaping and focusing on things and sharpening your taste and things that you're looking for. The only thing that I started questioning is animation that looks so realistic that it could have been done in film. Because if it can be done in film, to me, it's no longer animation. It has no purpose or reason to be in animation. For example, there was a wonderful, wonderful Japanese film that came out, I want to say early 2000s, called Jinro, The Wolf Brigade.
Right.
It's a fantastic dystopian futuristic film where what if the Nazi Germany had won and Japan had adapted that kind of rulership of neo-nationalism. And this young man who works for this military government faction that enforces law upon citizens. It's a beautiful film. It has fantastic script. It has a fantastic story, but it's so realistic looking that it's none of the spark, none of the imaginative visual charm that makes animation what it is present in it. It's almost done as a feature film that didn't have the budget to be live action. And that's why they decided to go with animation. And from that perspective, you can respect it. But as an animator, I felt that it didn't exploit the medium to its full extent. And if you were to ask me, Ben, what do you generally love? Do you have a particular style or thing that you look for? I love my animation that is removed from reality. I love my animation that it could have some grounded things in it. Like, for example, Star Wars Visions, which I'm sure we'll talk about, the first episode, The Duel, where the duel itself is very grounded. But when you look at the characters and then when they move outside of combat and the way that they look and how things animate in the background, it's very stylized. And that's what I enjoy in general.
That's a good point. I love that episode of The Duel as well. We'll get on to Star Wars shortly, because once we get off on that, I don't think we'll get off that subject at all, because I know what we both like. So if we speak about something that's sort of, I've got one more thing before I want to talk about Dune in a minute, but I want to ask you one more thing before that, which is you mentioned slightly earlier with your college studies and things, and that was mythology, because I know that you use in a lot of your YouTube videos and things, and when you speak about Star Wars and things, one of the things I really enjoy hearing about is when you talk about its comparison to mythology and sort of the sort of not necessarily tropes, but retelling of ideas and stories and journeys that have appeared previously in mythology, like the fallen hero, but then also the journey and things. So what got you, what made you go into that path? Because so many people watch movies and TV series and films and don't go into mythology.
Right.
What kind of got that intrigue fired up in you?
Mm-hmm. I suspect that a lot of modern audience who are glued to Hollywood and don't look outside of Hollywood or world cinema, I don't want to say nobody is ignorant. Everybody comes with a very specific worldview. And I suspect that a lot of that audience subconsciously still understands those elements in the storytelling. But how I came into it is historically, Russia and Greece have been two nations that were interconnected. Obviously, Russian language has the Cyrillic letters and a lot of words from Greek language. And because of all of both countries predominantly share the same religious practices, we always were like this tight. And the kids, my generation, I won't speak up for my father's generation or earlier, but my generation, kids in the 80s, we grew up reading Greek mythology books, watching adaptations of Russian animated films, which are done about the Greek heroic figures like Hercules, Jason and the Argonauts, the different, pieces dedicated to certain gods and nymphs and so forth. So it was in my vocabulary since childhood. Here's Russian folklore, right? The Slavic folklore. And here is the Greek culture and Greek myth. I always grew with each one side by side. So, and watching all of these, mythology films or fantasy films or folk tales, as we call them in Russia, which beautiful pieces, made in the 60s and 70s, full feature live action films that we grew up with, which are also known around the world. They're translated in different languages. When you watch that as a kid and you absorb it and it's part of your language, and then you go into Star Wars and you start learning the history of it, right? And DNA and what factors in. Here's John Williams over here and Ralph McQuarrie over there. Oh, who is Joseph Campbell? And from that point forward, once I discovered, obviously, Joseph Campbell and his theory of monomyth, it wasn't a grand discovery for me. It was tying everything into one package for me. As a kid who was always interested in folklore from Japanese culture, we had, again, Russian animated films made about the Japanese folklore, Chinese folklore, or West European or Scandinavian tales like the Frost Witch, or how do you call her? The Ice Queen or Frost Witch, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Scandinavian tales. That too. And to me, discovering Joseph Campbell made me take a deeper dive into it. It was like, okay, I knew this stuff kind of on the periphery, on the surface. Now I want to learn more.
And when you elaborate on with Joseph Campbell, what his primary theory was, what you were just speaking about for our audience.
Right. So there's this wonderful documentary that you can go and see based on his conversations, right? I think they were filmed at Lucas Ranch during his last years before he passed away, because George Lucas considered him his mentor and his friend, right? And Joseph Campbell makes a lot of commentaries on themes in Star Wars after the movies were released. But basically his concept of monomyth is the idea that all cultures, all the primitive cultures of the world share a common thread. They all have mythology, folklore as a part of their religious, spiritual traditions. And all of those myths are based on the idea of symbology, which comes from the subconscious. Right? Jung and Nietzsche, obviously, he refers to those as well. But generally, he's saying I don't think there's a more definitive scholar on world mythology than Joseph Campbell. He's got renowned for his work during the 60s. And to this day, you go to any bookstore and his book of A Hero with 1,000 Faces will be there sitting on the shelf. It's the definitive work on world mythology. And, it's such a hopeful and encouraging thought that we're all united, something that comes from our psyche, from somewhere buried deep underneath. Why the ancients were worshiping the sun at one point. Why later on we had Christ-like figures, right? The resurrection of the holy man who will basically bring enlightenment to the world, was the idea which started actually way, way before Christianity, right? One of the first resurrected figures is in Egyptian mythology, their folklore. And the deeper you go, the more you start unraveling the thread of what connects the world and what makes even the modern mind tick. Because we're surrounded by technology, we're surrounded by all these things. People saying, well, I want to be pragmatic, I want to believe in things that I see and hear. But there's also this deeply layered component to us as humans. And the more you study myth, the more you study Star Wars, the more you understand heroic motifs, the more I feel you go back into yourself and you learn about yourself.
Yeah, it is an intriguing. It makes you introspective in certain ways. And once you kind of see the patterns in a lot of humans, then it becomes easier in certain ways to recognize patterns within yourself as well. You know, it's one of those things I've spoken about on this podcast many a times, but my dad passed away when I was 19, and I've said that it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me, but it's the best thing that ever happened to my character. Because something like that made me have to sort of reevaluate what things about him I liked, what I didn't, and then think about, well, why was he the way he was in this way? Why was he the way he was in that way? And I was like, oh, because of this. And then I was like, well, I've got that trait as well. So what about me caused that? And what can I do going forward to try and change that? And with mythology and especially Star Wars, and they're still saying this today with like so many Star Wars content creators say this, where it's in short kind of trying to teach lessons in a way. The stories and the mythology, they're teaching you lessons about life by using parallels, but using much more extreme examples. With the Empire is obviously very much about sort of fascism and things like that. And it's, the dark side of the Force, and you get these amazing powers and you get to seemingly just do whatever you want to do, but it comes at a price. And there's, doing the right thing isn't always easy. It's often actually harder to do, and you'll get beaten down. But if you persevere and you have your heart in the right place, you can get through it. And it's things like you get children, the Marvel movies do it as well in a lot of ways. And it's like you get these films where children or adults or anyone alike, you consume this content and it's satisfying to a deeper level in a lot of ways. And, the stories themselves, they're so important to the world that you kind of get immersed in as well.
I just want to add that also, to bring to what you're saying is that there's a clear social function that a myth fulfills, right? It teaches the younger members of the society what is expected of them, how to behave and become the adults in this new world. But also it feels like in our modern world, it's substituting the biological need in us to worship. To realize that there's something greater than ourselves. And there is a religious aspect, there's a spiritual component to myth where a lot of people who claim like, look, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, I don't believe in God. That's all fine. I'm not neglecting that. But we have replaced our gods and heroes with something else. The most obvious, obviously, is Marvel and DC. It's a carbon copy of Scandinavian or Greek or Egyptian mythology transplanted onto modern times, right? Superman is basically Hercules. And all the myths are intertwined. And I think it's important to recognize that each myth has both. It can be a social function, and religious function. Like Hercules would have his own temple and worshippers and sect in one part of Greece, right? But he's also a hero of a tale that you relate to a child, and you say, if you want to grow big and strong like Hercules and be brave and walk through life with confidence, you need to emulate this model. Here's this hero. If you don't want to be like Jason and the Argonauts, I always like to bring this example where in the beginning of his journey, he's this heroic young man who takes his rightful place and earns back his throne. But later on, he becomes a villain of his own kingdom. And also for a young man to see that transformation, that heroes never stay the same, right? I'm pretty sure we'll touch upon Luke in The Last Jedi. Another excellent example. It's also such a vital aspect of realizing that heroes change and we must observe our growth through life and make sure we don't fall into the same pitfalls.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things as well, if you just tell a kid, don't be bad, they'll just be like, what?
Yeah.
What? Don't be bad or bad things will happen to you. Like, what? But then if you show them a thing where, like with, using Star Wars as an example, it's like, look, if you do something really nice and you're really good of heart, you could have magic powers. You're not literally telling a child that and lying to them, but it's that kind of belief where, in a sense, one of the reasons I like characters like Leia, especially when she's older, is that sort of more grounded view on things. And like you can't go around doing all these crazy things all the time and everything working out. You have to think about things. You have to, it's what she says to Poe in Last Jedi. You can't just jump in something and blow something up. You can't just go and be brash and do these silly things. You have to stop and think and reevaluate things, and not everything's how it seems. And learning to think in that way doesn't necessarily come from someone telling you to think in that way. It comes from children, obviously, the way they learn things up till, well, people are always learning, but especially children, they're absorbing all their environment and how to be a person. And when they witness, family and friends nearby doing stuff, that's a huge factor. But also kids always emulate stuff you watch, the impressions of, they want to dress up like them, they want to be this character. And if in your childhood you want to be certain characters and things, the elements of them that you like, you can kind of somewhat want to have elements like that in yourself. Like I was always like that with Obi-Wan. I was always, from the original trilogy and the original trilogy and the prequels, he was always my favorite character ever. And I was always like, no matter what happened to him, he's had like one of the worst lives in Star Wars, and he keeps just trying to do the best thing. And it's things like that which I wanted to try and be. People should be more like Obi-Wan for the most part. That's not a bad slogan. There are a couple of minor issues he had with praising Anakin, and
it's a good thing, because you want to look. Civilization has certain expectations, and in order for it to fully function, you want to teach kids these practices which help them be functional and constructive, not destructive. Right? If you have no laws, and a young man grows up and he has no value to other people's lives, and go take away stuff from you at a gunpoint, or worse, kill somebody, that works against civilization, not for it. And sometimes when people say, well, don't brainwash the kids, don't teach them this and that, somebody has a political agenda. Well, yes, there's always agenda. And the agenda of civilization is to survive and flourish, and not at the expense of its citizens, right? I should be able to thrive next to you, and we all should be happy and not at each other's throats, right? So you must teach a certain discipline to a kid. And that's what the function of mythology was.
I agree completely. And so moving on from that, let's talk about Dune a bit, because I haven't really spoken to anyone about Dune that much after I watched it a short while ago. And I will say, for guys here listening, there will be some minor spoilers, or maybe even major spoilers, I don't know, but to warn people, so you may want to skip ahead if you don't want to have anything about Dune spoiled for you. But, we'll try not to horrendously spoil everything immediately from the get-go, but it's got a lot of connections to Star Wars in the sense that it inspired Star Wars. The book, the original content, it inspired George Lucas. You can clearly see a lot of the elements of that. And I thought the film was really enjoyable. Like, out of interest, I assume you've seen the older film, the one from, was it the 80s?
Yes, I actually grew up with the older one, as I mentioned before, on a pirated tape with like cheap Russian single actor dubbing. I grew up with the original one.
So I've heard that it's a very different film. It's quite cheesy, and a lot of people really don't like it. Out of interest, how does it compare to the modern Dune, which obviously I've seen, but I haven't seen the old one?
I don't think they compare at all. I think they are completely different movies coming from a completely different creative center. As an adult, I could analyze and look at the older one, which granted, I haven't seen it in years. Last time I saw it maybe a couple of years back on the Blu-ray. But it feels like, to a modern viewer, it feels like a film that wanted to honor the book, and it's obviously created by people who worship the source material, but it feels like it falls into this kind of like industrial Hollywood machine of trying to make this mega blockbuster, having insane amount of money thrown at it, but at the same time not executing exactly its vision because of the interference from executive board. Right. People are under some sort of certain modern spell, like Star Wars fans, like modern filmmaking is all made in a committee. That's how all Hollywood film has been made through the 30s, through the golden age of cinema. Yes, before you had a vision behind one artist, one director, and sometimes they would fight their battles and win and get the films done their way. But other times investors would say like, we want this actress to be cast who's popular, let's say in 30s and 40s, because she's going to sell more tickets. It's always this interplay between creativity and the practical aspect of it. And it feels like when you watch the original film, it's brought down by all of that inner struggles of the making of the film. So in the end, it works as this visually appealing, beautiful, masterfully done special effects at the time, which I believe still hold up to this day. I mean, when you look at the Arrakis, when you look at the worms come out, like the blue eyes, the suits, everything, when you look at it visually, it's there. It's on point. It has such a wonderful cast of actors that regardless of what you think about the execution of the film, you got to pay tribute to how these actors work in the film. I thought they all did a wonderful job. Whereas the new film is, I can't also call an 100% flawless book transplanted onto film screen. What Denis Villeneuve was very consciously aware of, and he decided to strategically approach and say, like, look, hold on a second. The book has this very spiritual, nuanced way, the way that it relates characters, that it relates scenery and psychology and spirituality, that it is impossible to capture on screen. And he said, so what do? Do I completely butcher the job and do my own version of it? Or do I proceed and create the best version of kind of like a cinematic commercial for the book? If that makes any sense. He said, let me throw all the imagery on screen, juxtaposed with amazing cinematic score and actor play that will invite the audience to go and say, like, hey, I need to go to read the book now. Right. So basically, he's like having this bait in front of you, and he's waving it very expertly so, and saying, look, this is the best that this cinematic craft can do, and the rest is in the book. And I think on that score, I can't praise the movie more enough. He nailed it. I don't think anybody could have done a better job.
And do you think the book is it, I know you don't like saying if one is better or not than the other, but like, is the book, in some ways, it's got a lot more information, which is good, but can it be a bit overwhelming and too much, and the pacing's off? Like, how's the film and the book sort of compare, the newest film and the book? Because I've not read the book, to clarify, sorry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you and I spoke about it, and I was actually super excited to talk about this topic with you. So...
And that's the end of part 1. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. Part 2 will be out next week as usual, but as I said in the intro, consider checking out my Patreon at patreon.com/genuinechitchat, and you'll get access to part 2 of this conversation immediately, as well as hours of additional content of afterthoughts, which is what me and Megan do. We do it at least once a week. We do movie reviews, TV reviews. I've done a couple of solo ones on there, so I've done a Dark Disciple book review. I've done a couple of comic reviews, and also as Christmas comes near, there's going to be some extra special bonus content on there as well, including like a road trip me and Megan have gone on and a few other bits and pieces around there. So if you want to support the show and want loads of additional content and want to hear part 2 of conversations like this a week before anyone else does, please consider checking out my Patreon page. But anyway, guys, as I said, so part 2 of my conversation with Ben, we delve into Dune a little bit more. I would generally recommend people watch Dune because it is ace, but fear not, because the conversation that we do have on Dune, we don't do any major spoilers. There's like a minor, sort of light spoiler-ish on kind of thematically or more so one of a character's journeys a little bit. But if you're okay with hearing that, we don't talk about in depth of the film itself or anything like that. And I've not read any of the books or anything like that either, so I didn't want anything spoiled for me. But I just want to clarify, if you want to go and watch Dune with absolutely no knowledge of it at all, then maybe wait to listen to part 2. But after we talk about Dune for a little bit, we then talk about Star Wars, and we speak about Star Wars for about an hour or so. And next week's episode is a lot longer as well. It's about an hour and a half long, whereas this episode I think was like 30 to 40 minutes long, because I wanted part 2 to be like its own self-contained thing, just primarily talking about Dune and Star Wars. Also, make sure you check out my appearances on Star Wars Timeline. I've got links to those in the description, all 4 appearances, one of which I spoke with Ben about the 3 Star Wars trilogies in sort of a variety of ways, comparing them as such, and then the other 3 episodes we're talking about each of the sequel trilogy movies, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. So make sure you, if you're a Star Wars fan, check out Star Wars Timeline on YouTube. It is a really, really good channel, and I watch plenty of the videos on there regularly, and it is a lot of fun. Plus, you can follow him on Twitter, or you can join the Star Wars Timeline Facebook group, where we all talk about Star Warsy stuff quite a lot. But aside from that, guys, what have we got coming up after that? Well, I've got a conversation planned with Goff of Beer Nuts Productions in January. I've also got another conversation with Chris Brayton of the I Like to Like Things podcast, also planned in January. I've got Brad Sugars, who should be coming in either January or February as well as a few other returning guests I've got planned for 2022, and a lot of new guests as well. So it's a really, really exciting time to be a subscriber/follower of Genuine Chit-Chat, and it's an even more exciting time to be a supporter on Patreon, because obviously, as I said, over there's loads of additional content. But if you don't want to support the show financially, which I completely understand, especially at this time of year, you can do it in a variety of other ways. You can review on Good Pods or Apple Podcasts or Podcast Addict, and actually Spotify now have released where you can rate things. You don't need to write a review, you just give something out of 5-star rating. So if you listen to the show on Spotify, please consider giving it a 5-star rating. It would mean the absolute world to me. But in addition to that, please check out my YouTube channel where I upload video versions of these conversations. So when part 2 of this conversation does drop, I will have uploaded the full conversation onto YouTube with full video with Ben. In addition to that, there's also other conversations I've had that have got video. I also upload all my Star Wars comics and canon episodes on there. There's a few other bonus things on there too, but I want the YouTube channel link to be changed from like loads of gobbledygook to /genuine chit-chat, and I can't do that until I get 100 subscribers. So please consider subscribing. I know all of you guys listen on audio and barely anyone listens on YouTube, but if you do have a YouTube channel, it would really mean the world to me if you could go and do that. But if you don't want to do that, and you don't want to rate and review, and you don't want to become a financial supporter, then please share on social media with your friends, talk to people about it, and get more people onto Genuine Chit-Chat as well, because yeah, it would just mean the absolute world to me. But yeah, aside from that, guys, I hope you enjoy next week's episode when it comes out. But if I don't speak to you before then, I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. However you celebrate this time of year, I hope it all goes well for you. I hope the end of 2021 brings you everything that it wants, and that 2022 is a good year for all of us. And yeah, I'll be potentially releasing a little special thing on this feed around Christmassy time. I haven't fully decided yet, but I will definitely be releasing lots of content on Patreon. So that is a great way to get additional content over the Christmas period. There isn't going to be just Christmassy stuff either. So if you're getting a bit sick of Christmassy stuff, especially after Christmas, fear not. There is not going to be loads of Christmas stuff on there. It's going to be a variety of things. But yeah, thank you as always for listening, guys. It means the absolute world to me. I appreciate each and every one of you listening. I hope you have a good end to 2021. I hope to speak to you guys next week as well. Or if you're going to go over to Patreon, I hope to speak to you over there too. And yeah, if I don't speak to you before, have a great end of the year. I'll talk to you in 2022. And I just send you guys all love and hugs.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars comics and canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.